My name is Edgar Rachel Fouché. I'm here to speak about secret government technology, reverse engineering of alien artifacts, and the top secret MJ-12 committee. Before I'm through, you'll know exactly what the flying triangle is, the one that's been sighted around the world. It's the most exotic and classified aerospace vehicle that's ever been built. It may be stealthily hovering over Phoenix, Belgium, or your city. The company in question was involved in developing the TR3B gravity disruption device called the magnetic field disruptor, which is the circular accelerator part of the TR3B, which I'll go into more detail in a minute.
So I'd first learned about Ed Fouché back in 2004. I was just doing some research on anti-gravity, and I found an old presentation called The Case for Anti-Gravity, and right towards the end of that, they had mentioned Ed Fouché and quasicrystals and metamaterials, which I started looking into. Found, Ed Fouché's, original presentations from IUFOC in 1998. This idea of rotating mercury plasma engine, and so I started making a couple videos on the physics ideas behind this anti-gravity spinning mercury centrifuge engine and that whole gem theory thing. And that caught the attention of someone who knew Ed Fouché, a guy named Ella McCoy, who had a YouTube channel back in the day. But he put me in touch with Ed Fouché. The rest of this video, although not complete, is a list of man-made advanced propulsion, or as those of us in the know like to call them, alien reproduction vehicles. I'm going to go over a few known examples of these, and how to differentiate between them and actual alien vehicles, those produced and flown by extraterrestrial entities. The first on our list is the TR3B Flying Triangle, which is the craft we see in the first ever episode of X-Files. This craft was the first ever prototype ARV to use the superfluid anti-gravity centrifuge engine. It looks like they built the engine first and then came up with the aircraft design to build around it to make it fly. If you notice, the fluid is rotated inside of a small semi-spherical container located at the center of the craft. Since the TR3B uses an accelerator with a small radius, it only succeeds in eliminating 85% of the total weight of the craft. Thus, the rest of the lift is provided by 3 thrusters at each corner of the triangle, similar to the PV-704s used in the Avrocar propulsion drive, only these run on liquid oxyhydrogen. These serve to stabilize and control the flight of the craft, as well as a portion of the lift. Stabilization and direction is a key design problem with craft that utilize a superferrofluid anti-gravity engine. Note the 3 stabilizer units mounted on the underside of these other craft. These are most likely some sort of specialized gyroscopes, but they also could be some sort of wave amplifiers, as Bob Lazar suggests. Either way, their function is more or less the same: stabilization and direction. You can tell by the fact that there are 3 of them. It appears that they also double as tripod landing gear. Brad Sorensen produced this drawing of an ARV, or alien reproduction vehicle. Here are some other photographs of similar craft, which in my opinion are all man-made products of the secret government.
To me, the most fascinating vehicle from the Aurora program has been the TR3B. It's a triangular-shaped vehicle that uses a circular accelerator, as you imagine a circle within a triangle, that rotates a mercury-based plasma at 60,000 revolutions per minute, pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres, and supercooled to 150 degrees Kelvin. I absolutely believe that all the triangular-shaped vehicles that have been spotted belong to the U.S. government.
He does come from a background of, intelligence. And he did teach me a lot about, how the intelligence works in the military, and how these special access programs and how all the funding and the contracting and all that stuff really works. He did teach me an incredible amount about, how that stuff, really functions behind the scenes. But it also helped me, verify a lot of what he was saying. First off, we asked T.D. Barnes if Bob Lazar ever worked out at Area 51, and his answer was straight out no. He was former special projects manager out at Area 51 for almost a decade. When I asked him if Ed Fouché, if he could, ask around and tell me if Ed Fouché worked out there, his response back was, I can neither confirm nor deny whether Ed Fouché worked out at Area 51. And that kind of, confirmed it for me when T.D. Barnes said, he can't confirm nor deny whether Ed worked out there. That was like, well, that means he worked out there,
What was it about his explanation of the physics of the supposed TR3B that piqued your interest and made you think, maybe there's something here?
The thing that interested me first was that there was a couple different sources talking about this rotating superconductors. Research was just coming out. A lot of that research was being done at NASA at the time and was coming out through American anti-gravity around the same time. So we were learning about NASA's research with rotating superconductors, the Russian Podkletnov and his rotating superconductor experiment. And so I thought that there might be some sort of connection between, rotating superconductor anti-gravity research and this idea of a rotating mercury-based plasma. And so I began investigating that connection first, and that's what drew me initially to the propulsion technology side of it. But then the mention of quasi-crystals and metamaterials and all the interesting scientific literature I started finding when I began researching those topics made me instantly realize that, this was, metamaterials are used for invisibility technology, and then I started, realizing all the technology that, all the research that has been done out at Area 51, Project Rainbow, and all this other stuff, and I was able to confirm that a lot of those these materials were in fact, something special, and that, some ordinary staff sergeant from the military knowing about these things, there was something, maybe something more there, because it wasn't something that your average person talked about. In 1998, no, it was virtually unheard of. In fact, a lot of the physics literature, you can't find a lot of metamaterials. You can't find a lot of stuff in the literature on metamaterials or quasi-crystals before 2002. And Ed Fouché was talking about these things in 1998, nearly 4 years earlier. So that sort of, really made me say, wow, this is something you should be paying attention to and looking deeper into. When I started researching quasi-crystals, I realized that the guy who discovered quasi-crystals, Dan Shechtman, did his postdoc after receiving his degree in material science from Technion University in Israel. He went and did his postdoc at Wright-Patterson, so at the Wright State Materials Command, which is the exact place where, we'd expect these sort of alien materials to be, to be present and being analyzed. So I thought that was a very interesting connection, that the scientist who discovered quasi-crystals did some work connected to Wright-Patterson Material Command on icosahedral phase crystals and stuff. So it was quite interesting to learn about that. Then, of course, if you research all the history of metamaterials, you'll find that these were developed pretty much at Area 51. Was a lot of the pioneering research into metamaterials and nuclear magnetic resonance and EMF response. Those technologies were pioneered at Area 51. Again, metamaterial is an interesting word. It's basically a metamaterial, for the layman, is a material that gains its resonant or response properties through its structure, not through its composition or what it's made of, but by just the natural structuring of the actual material. So it was discovered that grids, for example, had a different response, or things with sharp edges had a different response than smooth edges and rounded edges, which is why you see all those sharp edges on the F-117 stealth fighter versus the round edges on the fuselage than the quasi-crystals, because that was some deep insight into some interesting information, and how he knew about that and how he was aware of those technologies. I'm still trying to figure that out, and I think it might have been he might have knew Hal Puthoff and might have gotten the information through Hal Puthoff. That was one contact I know that he had, because he talked about Hal Puthoff, and actually had his email and put me in touch with Hal Puthoff years ago at one point. So I know that he had some of these contacts who were into this black world physics stuff. So a quasi-crystal is a aperiodic crystal. It has a different phase it has recurring symmetries, but it doesn't have innate symmetry at the basic level. It has a more complex symmetry shape. So there were originally thought not to exist. In fact, one of the most famous scientists of the day, Linus Pauling, once famously claimed there's no such thing as quasi-crystals, only quasi-scientists, making a direct, jab at Daniel Schechtman, who's of course the scientist that made this discovery and won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of quasi-crystals. Also, quasi-crystals have very amazing optical properties, which is one of the main things that I took note of and started researching when I first found out about them. For instance, researcher from Princeton, New Jersey, Eric Quinones, showed that you could bend fiber optic signals at 90-degree angles without losing signal quality. So basically, you can build photonic computers out of quasi-crystals and metamaterials, and build waveguides that would use light in and photonics in a type of advanced circuitry. So that was what I first saw and started learning about when I first researched these things back in 2004, and I immediately, realized that, we're dealing with something very close to alien technology, and what I would believe alien technology would look like, described as we think of it, engineered down to the atomic level.
A rotating, a pulsating